So we're talking to Will Nett, author of My Only Borough, and this is specifically for Local History Month this time. So as one of the writers, one of the authors of one of the books that is one of the best-selling books in Middlesbrough, which covers a wide range of lots of different aspects of Middlesbrough as well as the football club, would you like to have a chat about all of that, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, you've done the introduction, so I think most people are probably aware of My Only Boro, which is probably what we're going to talk about a little bit. I am contractually obliged to hold up a copy whenever I'm doing an interview, so there it is. If you haven't read it already, please do, but most people probably have. But I've been looking back at it quite recently because I knew I was doing this chat, and I've been working on a few little pieces for Tees Online, the website, which is a great sort of local resource for cultural and arts related stuff, and it's made me sort of look back on the 10 years that have passed since I first started writing it and looking at all the changes that had taken place, because it does feature heavily local history, but it was very much prescient in places when I first wrote it about things that I would sort of foresee. Really, I'm not trying to say I predicted a great deal of the things that happened, but I don't think anyone could, because we've gone through so much stuff in Middlesbrough over the last 10 years. But it's been quite interesting taking a look back through it, certainly.
So going back to the when you were actually writing My Only Borough, when you read it, it's almost as if we're wandering through the town with you, going, oh, that over there, did you know this about that? And wander, and then just around the corner. And it's almost like a meander through the town. And I know at the time talking to you, that's what you intended. So one of my first question is, do you have any favourite spots in Middlesbrough that when you were writing about them, really the history of that particular part of Middlesbrough really caught your attention?
Well, I was coming at it from an angle of the sort of classic outsider status, because I've always lived sort of on the very edge of Middlesbrough, on the edge of town, if you like. But the place I was probably drawn most to within Middlesbrough were places along the river, but I think that's more from having a sort of travel mindset. You're always looking at sort of ways and routes to leave and come back, I suppose. So the river was quite a key thing, and it's hugely important to the town, as rivers are to most towns. That originally, when towns were founded all over the world, they were the sort of nucleus for the community, because that's where trade came to and came from. And the transport bridge as well, which you have to mention, it was hugely iconic. So that was a kind of a good focal point for a lot of the stuff I wanted to write about. And even the transport bridge itself has gone through changes over the last 10 years, because it's currently out of commission. And I think there's just been some announcement that there's going to be some funding to sort of not renovate it as such, but certainly get it back to its original form, I guess. So yes, landmarks like that, and they're probably few and far between in Middlesbrough, and that's probably because it's a small town, were very important. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Do you have a favourite period in history? Because Middlesbrough is quite young. If you look at the area, it's surrounded by some really old villages and towns, like Stockton's got its ancient market charter, villages like Norton Yarm, towns like Stokesley, centuries old. But Middlesbrough itself is actually quite young historically.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think it's barely 160 years old, really. I know there was sort of founding parts of it prior to it receiving town status. So there's always been some presence in the area, certainly. But as an actual town, it's an infant, which of course brings to mind the infant Hercules comment that people think of when they think of the town. And certainly a lot has been made of that over the last sort of 10 years or so. I'm sort of, because I'm from sort of the outskirts of town, I tend to gravitate towards the sort of greener areas, if you like. So I'm pleased to see that more recently there's been quite a lot of announcements about sort of conservation stuff that's going to be introduced, so the planting of trees and the development of green spaces, which when I started writing My Only Boro, those weren't things that were on the agenda at all. To give an idea of when it was and what I was working on, one of the big things was the introduction of this potential ski centre, which has certainly fallen by the wayside now. But some projects do, and that was one of them. But there's been a lot of other positive stuff that's developed. I think culturally, it's had a really good spell. The amount of sort of art groups and musical ventures and writing creative things have been hugely developed over the last few years, certainly.
In My Only Borough, you talk about some of the buildings in the town centre as well, and some of the old clubs and some of the old, you talk about, you know, the boxers and some of the real characters in the town. So what I was really curious about was, how do you get a real feel? You're not just talking about places, you are talking about people, and people back in the day. How did you research and get that feeling for the people at the time?
Well, I think it came naturally, really, because people in Middlesbrough are so, shall we say, forthright and certainly blunt, which is a good thing. You know, they'll freely talk easy, and they're very welcoming, as people in the north are, as Yorkshire's famous for. So to gain access to people and just pick up bits and pieces that you could use in a book was fairly easy, really. I've always been involved in that kind of background, that sort of working class sort of pub environment. My parents were certainly from that kind of background, you know, so they had a wealth of stories about pubs and nightclubs and different characters, and stories about concerts and gigs that they'd been to and events that attended and football matches. And I think everyone's got a story like that, or a few. So those were at the forefront of my mind, really, when I was doing the research for it. And as I say, the people just wanted to talk to you. The people in Middlesbrough, they'll stop you in the street and just tell you all sorts of gossip about the neighbour and this, that and the other. So it really lent itself to writing a book that really got across what it's like to be from Middlesbrough.
Yeah, and looking back in history as well, sort of over the past sort of, I mean, I know you talked to some people who were in their 80s, so talking to them about, you know, changes in the town. So how important do you think is that storytelling tradition to local history and archiving it and keeping it?
Yeah, it's crucial, because we've even just in the last sort of 10, 20 years, we've come so far and changed so much. The town's virtually unrecognisable to what it was like maybe a quarter of a century ago. So even those stories, even people who probably say in the 50s, the place is largely unrecognisable. A lot of the old buildings that they would have frequented and recognised have been done away with. So for better or worse, you know, the town has to develop and plan and move on, certainly. But there's probably a lot of buildings that have been lost that people always would think, oh, well, we ought to have tried to have preserved that somewhat. But yeah, from the sort of time lapse point of view, yeah, people now who are sort of in the 70s, 80s, and even older would have seen a remarkable amount of change in developments. Anyone who lived through World War II, who's still alive and from Middlesbrough, would recall probably the effects that had. The bombing of the train station. There was air raids on the town routinely, and that seems like a lifetime ago now, and it probably is to someone like me who's half of that age. So the importance of capturing that story and keeping a record of it, a document of it, is crucial, I think.
Brilliant. Do you have any advice if anybody is looking at writing a local history book, either whether it's non-fiction, the way My Only Borough is, or if somebody wanted to fictionalize? Do you have any sort of tips on how to research, how to capture that essence of a time that's gone?
Well, I like the idea of writing a fictional account about the town, and it has been done by other authors, where every author would have a different take on it. So it is something I've considered. You could focus on sort of any particular period, really. Again, the wartime kind of view, or more recent things, with things like the work of John Nicholson, for example, and Richard Millward, who've written about the town and the environs. From a non-fiction point of view, I would just give the same advice that I probably gave myself, which was just to go out and live really and do whatever it is you do. I used to just go out and go to work and go out drinking, and that's when you just pick up bits and pieces that were useful in a story, and walk a lot as well, because I go walking around cities all over the world, and that's a good way to sort of glean info. You probably see things you wouldn't ordinarily see if you're on a bottom top bus or driving around in a car, and there's probably always going to be stuff that people discover that the previous generations didn't know about. So I would urge them to, yeah, just get on the ground and get out and see what's there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Just the best to Middlesbrough for this Discover Middlesbrough month. There's all sorts of great events going on. I know it's a little bit difficult at the moment with regards to the pandemic, but I'm sure we'll all be able to get out and get together and do stuff again in, I think, probably October. There might be another one if it's still a biannual thing. So hopefully we'll see you out and about, and lots of events to come.